been up on the wall for a while, H128, which many of you will probably recognize if you haven't looked at it since you co-sponsored it. And I think credit your names of committee members on that bill. I don't think we'll be back after lunch. I think the floor is going to go long enough that we won't be wanting to come back. So why don't we start by just going around the room and those of us at the table introducing ourselves, because I don't think we've had the EC in to testify, and many of us are new, testify this year anyway. So I'm David Durfee. I'm from Shaftesbury in Bennington County. I represent Shaftesbury and part of Sunderland and Glastonbury.
Rodney Graham, represent Williamstown and Chelsea.
Jed Lipsky, Memorial One District, represents Stowe.
Charles Wilson, Caledonia 3, which is Lyndonville, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, and Newark.
David Templeman, I represent Orleans 3, which is Orleans, Barton, Orleans Village, Brownington, and Westmore. Thank you.
Mike Rice, representing Bennington Rutland District, Townsend, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Tabor, and Peru.
Hi, I'm Esme Cole, represent 106, which is Hartford.
Nice to meet you. For the record, my name is John Beeling. I'm the commissioner from the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Morning. Thank you for being with us this morning. So we're here to hear from you on S115, and in particular, we're looking at the last section, which deals with stormwater. May want to ask you about not just the version that passed out of the Senate, but the version that was originally drafted by the Senate Ag Committee. But if you've got thoughts or want to start out.
Sure. I mean, I did testify before I entered the Energy and Natural Resources Committee on this bill, and we're not involved with the fee issue. That's really between the farms, the utilities, and agriculture is involved with that too. That's not our interest. I think that's something that needs to be resolved between those parties. The only thing that I raised before the committee that is of concern to us is prior to that testimony, I think maybe a day or so before that, we received an email from the EPA, and it raised some concerns about the bill as drafted, potentially limiting the ability of these MS4 permits. It's municipal separate sewer systems. I may have got that wrong. That's why they call it MS4. These are stormwater permits. And so we're delegating the authority to enforce the Clean Water Act by the federal government. And this is part of our Clean Water Act compliance. And so the EPA has raised an issue saying that they're not so much the fee issue, but just there's some language in there that raised concerns that this may, I think, unintentionally limit the authority of the MS4 permit holders to enforce the MS4 permits. And that's obviously a concern to us. We see that, and I just wanted to bring that to the legislature's attention because it's pertinent. I mean, and it's very relevant to us. We've only had really one conversation with the EPA. We haven't down particularly deep. So our hope is we can resolve this, but that's really our concern. The fee piece, that's frankly an equitable issue, and I think that needs to be and a legal issue. And I think the utilities have come in and offered testimony. So I think probably this committee, I know Senate Agriculture has heard from them, and they've raised concerns. And frankly, that's their heart, right? So hopefully that can be worked out. But I have to look at my program, and if something that is passed through this body inhibits that ability, that's something that I am concerned with. So that's really our interest in this matter.
I wonder if you can point us to the language, either in where we ended up or what was drafted that was the concern too.
I believe, again, we haven't really drilled into this. I believe it's the language that basically states that, the utilities would be limited to the same authority as the secretary has. I think that's the rub, because under my understanding, again, this is very preliminary, is that under the Code of Federal Regulations, MS4 utilities need to have the ability to do things like pass ordinances and things of that nature to help them implement the MS4 program. I think that is the issue, but we haven't gotten to the point. They don't, this is unusual, I'll say that, right? EPA doesn't normally get involved in things like this. I'm not sure how it came to their attention. It's unusual to say the least. We are under some scrutiny, I'll say that. There is a petition pending to remove our delegation under the Clean Water Act, and that may have led to some heightened scrutiny here. But that's as far as, I believe it's language pertaining to limiting their authority, not so much as it pertains to assessing fees, but just in general. So my sense is that could be worked out. But as of now, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if you have the email, I can send it to your committee assistant.
We've heard about the email, but I don't think I've seen it.
But I can email it right now if you'd like.
Want to send it to Laura? She can.
Yeah, let me shoot that up. I'll get that to you, but I mean, I can just read, it's very brief. You can, here's the punchline. My reading of the new language is that it would limit the ability of MS4 permit holders to effectively fill the coverage gap explicitly identified in MS4 permit for post-construction stormwater control, potentially putting MS4 permit holders out of compliance with their permit upon its passage. So that's what raised our attention. We don't want that to happen. We need to have these permits be enforceable. Again, I don't think it really relates to the specific problem that's attempted to be addressed here, which has to do with the assessment of fees. I think it's broader than that, so that's the kind of thing I need to pay attention to. And it's not, it's not like the only reason we want to be in compliance with the Clean Water Act is because we can lose our delegation. It's because we want to enforce the Clean Water Act, and we don't want our utilities to lose a tool in their toolkit that enable them to do that. So that's really where we fit into this conversation. Again, we're out of the conversation between the utilities and the farms and agriculture. That's really a separate conversation, whether it's equitable to assess these fees, whether it's legal. Again, not our, but I need to make sure that this program is effective and enforceable.
So we can look at the email, or we can ask maybe ask our legislative counsel to come in and walk through it with us. But I think I'm still not clear on, and maybe I'm not sure if you said you don't have this in front of you, John.
I have the
Commissioner.
I'm trying to find my new I'll keep working on that.
Okay, yeah, we don't need, I don't think we'll go through it word for word here. But the other piece I think it would be helpful is if we knew what draft of the language the EPA was looking at when they.
It was the bill as originally presented. So we haven't really had a conversation with them after the language with the study was added. I'm assuming that would at least allay their concerns pending the results of the study. Because it's the language saying that basically the way I read this is that provision would be put on hold. There would be a pause put on assessing these fees until the study takes place. So at least that gives us breathing room to try to work things out with EPA. So that's where we're at. We haven't, down the road, if this is passed as drafted, we should be able to figure out exactly what EPA's concerns are, and we should come up with some language that would, allay their fears and hopefully be able to move forward with it. But as of today, we're not there with them.
Committee questions? Representative Tupman.
So I'm just looking, do you have this? I think it's version. I think it's that one. Page 8 is a bunch of stricken language, which includes any municipality may adopt bylaws to implement stormwater management or control. Us crossing that out, or the Senate crossing that out, must be the culprit, right?
That's my.
Yeah, that should be easy. Steve.
Other questions? When I'm just trying to find the version that you've got there, Representative Templeman.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, there. Actually,
So this
version
is passed by the Senate, and the big Z there, or backwards Z, would have been crossing out language that was in the bill. in the draft that the Ag Committee, I think, passed out. So the language they added, sorry, I know that no one else, or some people may not have this sitting right in front of them, but it looks like they had, and I'm wondering if this is a language that was the concern, added language saying, provided the municipality does not exceed the secretary's authority.
I think that is what they flagged because, independent of the farm issue, they need to have the ability. So federal law, folks know, federal law sets the floor, states go up from there. And so there's a minimum requirement that the MSO program must meet. And one of them is that they have to have the ability to pass things like ordinances, things of that nature. And if we're limiting them to only the things that we have jurisdiction over, they obviously couldn't do anything that's in conflict with state law. But there's things they can do. Let's just say a non-farm issue. They may want to pass an ordinance which governs some non-farm stormwater issues, and that's problematic.
And it's the secretary in this instance is referring to the Secretary of Natural Resources, not agriculture.
I did just forward the EPA email to your committee.
Okay. Thank you. The only other thing that I want to just ask about, you mentioned a petition. A petition was circulating?
There's a petition pending that was filed by a number of environmental groups. It's not relevant to this particular issue. It has to do with just Clean Water Act enforcement on agricultural, basically, in a nutshell, they're arguing that all of the authority to regulate, water coming off a farm should reside in my agency. At present, it's split between the agriculture, which does non-point source, and A&R, which does point source. That's their argument, and we in agriculture have been responding with them to them. We've been meeting with them. That's at play, but that's not really going into this. All I'm saying is that may be why this will cross their radar because they're keeping an eye on things. It's speculation. We don't know that, but it's not common that we get comments from EPA on state legislation. It doesn't happen very often.
Okay. Any other thoughts for the commissioner while we have him here? Questions? Thank you.
Thank you
for joining us then.
All right. If you need anything else, just let me know. I can try to get it to you.
I'm wondering, since we have Steve Colley here, are you interested in sharing anything further thoughts with the committee this morning, Steve? Beyond what you've already had to say, I don't think we want you to come back in and repeat anything you've already said. But
if you'd like to, yeah, there's certainly, I'd be happy to.
Okay, yeah, is that all right with the committee? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. So I appreciate what Commissioner Beeling just said and agree that we don't want to do anything that upsets the balance between the federal government, A&R, and the Agency of Agriculture. However, if the EPA has an issue with the amendment that we proposed, then they have an issue with current existing state law. Because what current existing state law says is that the Agency of Natural Resources does not have any authority to permit stormwater that's subject to the required agricultural practices. So ag stormwater subject to the RAPs. The amendment that was proposed was an attempt to do nothing more than to conform and make it clear to towns what current state law already requires. So if the EPA is an issue, it's an issue with existing state law. But what the commissioner just said to me raises an interesting question. If there's no issue over fees, then I feel like the language that we proposed was simply to make it because A&R has authority over stormwater, and then there are exemptions listed. And the first exemption is stormwater subject to the RAPs. And all we were trying to do with the amendment is make it clear to towns that your authority, since you have to be consistent with A&R, includes honoring those exemptions. And so we were not in any way proposing, and I don't think we did, but proposing that towns' authority over stormwater, that's consistent with A&Rs is in any way restricted. Towns can do, in my judgment, my legal judgment, anything that A&R can do. What I think towns can't do is more than A&R can do. So that language could be tweaked easily to say towns can't charge fees for ag stormwater, period. You don't need a study to do that, in my opinion. If the EPA has an issue with existing state law, that's obviously a very different issue, very different subject. But this was an email from a permit writer from the EPA who only wrote because somebody contacted him. I think it was a him. So it's not like the Environmental Protection Agency has contacted the state and said, as far as I know, anything substantive about Vermont state law. Permit writer was contacted. He said, hey, what's happening with this? We should absolutely, as John is doing, Commissioner Beeling is doing, we should have those conversations. But I don't feel like we need to study it for a year to figure this out.
So, thank you. Questions? Yes, sir.
So the ANR, as things stand now, do they have all of the powers and jurisdiction to fulfill the mandate of the EPA?
We certainly believe they do. I think, I don't want to speak for ANR, but I think they believe they do as well. Absolutely. They are delegated by the EPA to manage the NIPDES program that's come up before and to manage stormwater in the state of Vermont. So ANR is the delegate. The only authority that I understand the legislature gave municipalities was the same authority that ANR has to manage stormwater as long as they take all of the legal responsibility for doing that. So what the legislature did in state statute was set to these towns that have MS4 permits. If you want to take all the responsibilities, you can essentially stand in ANR's stead, and you can do this instead. But ANR, as I understand it, and Commissioner Beeling can correct me if I'm wrong, ANR, I believe, also has to permit these towns to do that. I think ANR has to agree these towns can do it. They can take the authority. So I cannot understand under any interpretation of our current law how towns can take more authority than ANR has. And that's what this issue is about. And we're not trying to restrict towns' abilities to anything other than what ANR's is. And I don't understand how a town can have more authority over stormwater or under the National Pollution Elimination Discharge System than ANR has, because it is the entity with the authority delegated by the state legislature and by the EPA.
But with exception to agricultural activity.
Correct. They have authority over stormwater, but not over stormwater on a farm that's subject to the required agricultural practices.
Does the EPA, though, on a more federal level, have that authority over the agricultural activities?
Under the NIPDES federal system, agricultural stormwater is also exempt. So they can, we've talked about this before, both ANR and or the EPA can determine that a farm is a CAFO, a concentrated animal feeding operation. And if they do that, then they can make them get a NIPDES permit for that CAFO. Even then, though, as I understand it, agricultural stormwater is not part of that permit, but the CAFO itself can have a permit for any discharges that it has.
Right. Okay.
So that's the thing. Ag stormwater isn't subject to ANR jurisdiction. If it's subject to the required agricultural practices, it's not subject to the EPA's jurisdiction. And so I don't know how towns can take this authority that the state doesn't have and the federal government doesn't have.
And I offer that observation.
Commissioner, do you want to come back up to the table? There's
There's another chair you both can sit.
We can share the table. So the only, and I think, the problem is I just think that this is too broad as drafted, because towns can exceed our authority. They can't conflict with state law. A town can pass a more stringent ordinance than we do. It's just they couldn't pass an ordinance that conflicts with state law. So state law says you can't regulate ag stormwater, then they can't regulate ag stormwater. This wouldn't it doesn't affect that. This is really, that's the problem I'm having, is that this is a very specific issue we're trying to address. And I think it's just going broader than it needs to be. I mean, I think we can address this issue without inhibiting their ability otherwise, because there's lots of other stormwater out there. There's tons of contributors to stormwater, and we don't want to see that constricted in any way. So it's just kind of like, to me, it's a very separate issue. It's just the way this is drafted. It says they can't exceed our authority. That's not consistent with federal law. Federal law says they can pass ordinances. So in state and federal law, again, they're the floor, and if the town wants to exceed it, it can't conflict with state law, it can't conflict with federal law. But they could have an ordinance saying for industrial parks, blank acreage, this is the fee, or something along those lines. So I mean, just to me, it's like, it'd be better if we could be more precise here in what we're trying to get at.
So it feels like there may be a way forward here if we can get language that, and I'm wondering, we could ask legal counsel to work on something, but I'm wondering if the agency would be interested in chatting offline with DEC and coming back with something that satisfies both sets of concerns here.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if you're okay with it, I'll try to restrict the language a little bit so that it's clear that we are only talking about stormwater on farms and the resultant fee. And I'll share that with the commissioner and with Michael Grady, just because he's been, if that's okay, working on this, and just see if we can come up with something. Because that's the only intent here. It's not to manage, we're only trying to have towns not do more than ANR does with ag stormwater on farms. That's it.
Good. All right. Well, I think that would be the best resolution. So we'll leave it to two of you or the people who work with you to see if we can do that.
Okay, great.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We want to make sure we don't have anybody else on the committee who might chime in. We don't, it looks like. If the committee has any other thoughts, happy to hear them. Otherwise, we can pause and take a break before our next witness, which is currently scheduled for 10:15.